The 18-year-old's body lay broken and bloodied in the middle of the road, 16 stab wounds marking the savage brutality of her final moments. Linda Lulu Ree Caesar had been found clinging to life in Hartford's Keeney Park at dawn on July 13, 1983. But her fight was nearly over. The young woman who friends knew simply as Lulu had endured torture that no human being should ever face, and despite the best efforts of medical professionals, she would die within the hour. What began as a routine bike ride through the park for two job seekers became the discovery of one of Hartford's most vicious unsolved murders, a case that would haunt investigators for more than 4 decades. Lulu Caesar was not a typical teenager by conventional standards. While many 18-year-olds were contemplating college or career paths, Lulu was focused on day-to-day survival, in an environment where safety was never guaranteed. Her story reflects the harsh realities faced by countless young women who found themselves marginalized by society, vulnerable to exploitation and violence. What makes Lulu's case particularly tragic is how it represents both her status as a victim of circumstance and ultimately a victim of unspeakable brutality. The morning of July 13, 1983, began routinely for two men cycling through Keeney Park, en route to seek employment in a neighboring town. At approximately 6 a.m., their journey was interrupted by a horrific discovery that would forever change their lives and launch one of Hartford's most challenging murder investigations. Detective Andrew Jacobson of the Hartford Police Department would later describe the scene as super violent, noting that the small young woman had been stabbed brutally and was wearing next to nothing. Despite the extensive nature of her injuries, Lulu remained alive when the cyclists found her, though barely conscious and unable to communicate coherently. She could only moan in response to attempts at conversation, her body racked with pain from the savage attack she had endured. In the pre-cellular phone era, one of the men was forced to cycle away from the scene to locate a telephone and summon emergency assistance. Precious time lost while Lulu fought for her life. The first police officer to arrive encountered a scene of extraordinary violence. Lulu lay with her head and face submerged in a large pool of blood and vomit, evidence of both the physical trauma she had sustained and her body's desperate attempts to survive. Paramedics immediately began administering first aid, but the severity of her injuries made it clear that field treatment would be insufficient. They rushed her to the hospital with maximum urgency, hoping that medical intervention might save her life. Despite the dedicated efforts of emergency room physicians who worked on Lulu for more than 30 minutes, the extensive damage from multiple stab wounds proved insurmountable. She was pronounced dead just after 7 a.m., less than 2 hours after her discovery in the park. Adding to the tragedy was the fact that authorities had no immediate way to identify the victim, as no personal belongings or identification were found with her body. While investigators worked to establish the victim's identity, crime scene technicians began processing what would prove to be a disturbing tableau of violence. The physical evidence told a chilling story of pursuit, assault, and murder that painted a picture of Lulu's final terrifying moments. Detective Jacobson's examination of the scene revealed a large pool of blood in the middle of the road where Lulu was found, accompanied by a smaller pool of yellow fluid, indicating that she had vomited during the attack. A short distance away, investigators discovered a path leading into the wooded area of the park, marked by a trail of discarded clothing and evidence of struggle. They found a pair of red shorts belonging to Lulu, stained with blood, followed by white pump shoes several feet further along the path. Deeper into the woods, investigators located a substantial amount of blood on the ground, next to which lay Lulu's underpants and a white headband. A blood trail led from this location back to the road where her body was discovered. The crime scene evidence suggested a horrifying sequence of events in which Lulu had been attacked in the wooded area, her clothing torn from her body during the assault. Detective Jacobson theorized that during the violent encounter, Lulu had attempted to flee while her attacker continued stabbing her, resulting in the trail of blood and clothing that marked her desperate escape attempt. The brutality of the attack indicated that Lulu had been tortured and made to suffer extensively before succumbing to her injuries. Aside from a car tire print discovered at the scene, investigators found little physical evidence that might lead them to the perpetrator. No murder weapon was recovered during the initial crime scene processing, and the outdoor location of the attack complicated evidence collection efforts. In the early 1980s, law enforcement relied primarily on fingerprint analysis rather than DNA testing, making the lack of clear physical evidence particularly challenging for investigators. The location of the crime presented additional obstacles for the investigation. Keeney Park, while featuring a beautiful golf course that was pleasant during daylight hours, transformed into an extremely dark and isolated area after sunset. The thick woods provided perfect cover for illicit activities, and the absence of surveillance cameras in the 1980s meant that criminal acts could occur without detection. Detective Jacobson noted that the park's layout made it an ideal location for individuals seeking to engage in activities away from public scrutiny. This wasn't the first time Keeney Park had been the site of a brutal murder. Just 1 year earlier, the naked body of 28-year-old Sylvia Baker had been recovered from a pond within the park boundaries. Baker had been found with her hands bound and had died from strangulation, leading investigators to wonder whether the two murders might be connected. However, no links between the cases were ultimately established, and both murders represented part of a disturbing pattern of violence against Black women in Hartford during the 1980s and 1990s, crimes that often went unsolved. Despite the challenging circumstances, investigators achieved a significant breakthrough in identifying their victim within the first few hours of the investigation. They had taken Polaroid photographs of Lulu's face, and one of the detectives recognized her as being from the Barber Street area of the city. Through community outreach and local knowledge, they were able to positively identify the victim and determine her place of residence. 18-year-old Lulu Caesar rented a room in a house on Sargent Street, located just a few miles from Keeney Park. Her landlord informed police that Lulu frequently stayed out all night, often not returning until morning. The landlord's son reported seeing Lulu at the house just before midnight on July 12th, the night before her murder. She had been alone at that time and mentioned that she wouldn't be home until 10 a.m. the following day, though she didn't specify her planned activities or companions for the evening. When investigators searched Lulu's room, they found little of immediate investigative value. However, they did discover several pieces of paper containing telephone numbers, which they collected in hopes that the associated individuals might provide information about Lulu's life, relationships, and activities leading up to her murder. These contacts would prove valuable in developing a fuller picture of Lulu's circumstances and the events of her final night. The autopsy findings provided crucial details about the nature of Lulu's death and the extent of violence she had endured. The medical examiner documented 16 separate stab wounds distributed across her body: 9 to the rear of her head, 1 to her upper right shoulder area, 1 to her chin, 4 defensive wounds to her right hand, indicating she had tried to protect herself, and 1 to the left side of her chest. The manner of death was officially ruled homicide, confirming what the crime scene evidence had already suggested. Surprisingly, despite Lulu being found in a state of undress, the medical examination revealed no indication of sexual assault. No semen was detected, and toxicology reports showed that Lulu had no drugs or alcohol in her system at the time of her death, meaning she was completely sober during the attack. The medical examiner also noted that the stab wound to Lulu's heart would have caused relatively rapid death, which was significant given that she was found alive by the cyclists. This timing suggested that she had been stabbed shortly before their discovery, meaning her killer could have still been in the park when help arrived. The investigation's first potential lead came through an anonymous tip identifying a suspect named Eric as Lulu's killer. The caller provided Eric's full name and claimed he had murdered Lulu in Keeney Park before hanging up without leaving contact information. When investigators ran a background check on Eric, they discovered he had multiple surnames and birth dates on file, suggesting possible identity issues or criminal history. However, whatever information police gathered about Eric apparently didn't warrant serious consideration, as he was never mentioned again in case documentation. Over the following days, investigators interviewed family members, friends, acquaintances, and individuals who had seen Lulu in the hours before her murder. Some of these contacts were provided by Lulu's sister, while others may have been identified through the phone numbers found in her room. Several witnesses indicated that Lulu had been involved in sex work, with known prostitutes telling detectives she had been working the area for approximately 3 weeks. However, Detective Jacobson noted that Lulu had never been arrested for prostitution, making it impossible to confirm these allegations without hearing from Lulu herself. Witnesses described Lulu as something of a party girl who would accept rides from various people to attend gatherings at different locations. One witness contacted police claiming that Lulu had gotten into a fight with a man named Michael at approximately 12:30 a.m. on July 13 at Jerry Mack, a local neighborhood bar where everyone congregated. The bar owner confirmed Lulu's presence at his establishment but couldn't identify her companions, while he acknowledged that some kind of altercation involving a female had occurred outside. He didn't specify who was involved. Like the Eric tip, no additional information about Michael surfaced in case files. Another witness provided more credible information, reporting that he had observed Lulu walking north on Vine Street, approximately 1 block from Keeney Park, accompanied by an unknown woman around 12:15 a.m. The same witness saw Lulu and the woman, again on Vine Street between 2:30 and 3:00 a.m., and his description of Lulu's clothing matched items found at the crime scene, lending credibility to his account. The timing discrepancies between various witness statements suggested that Lulu may have left the bar after the reported fight and been seen for the first time on Vine Street, though her whereabouts during the approximately 2-hour gap before being seen again remained unknown. Throughout the summer of 1983, investigators continued interviewing potential witnesses about Lulu's murder, but no significant developments occurred until September 13th, when Robert Graham contacted the Hartford Police Department requesting to speak with detectives investigating the case. They arranged to meet him at the corner of Capon Street and Enfield Street in the city's North End, and what Graham had to say immediately captured their attention. Robert Graham was already known to law enforcement as a violent sex offender. In 1975, he had been convicted of sexually assaulting a woman in her home, a crime for which he served 8 years before being released in February 1983, just months before Lulu's murder. His recent release from prison and violent criminal history made investigators particularly interested in whatever information he might provide. Graham's account was both detailed and disturbing. He claimed that on July 13, 1983, between 2:00 and 2:30 a.m., he had been at Jerry Mack Cafe talking with Lulu Caesar. He described her clothing with remarkable accuracy, stating she wore a cranberry top, cranberry shorts, and a white headband. His ability to describe her attire precisely suggested he had indeed encountered Lulu that night. According to Graham's story, he and Lulu left the cafe around 2:30 a.m. and stood outside for approximately 20 minutes before walking south on Sigourney Street toward Homestead Avenue. During their walk, Lulu allegedly spotted Jennifer and her boyfriend Roger driving by in a dark blue Buick. Graham claimed a car pulled alongside them, and Jennifer and Roger exited the vehicle to chase Lulu up the street, pursuing her because she owed them $40. Graham's account continued with Roger catching Lulu and forcing her into the back seat of the car before they made a U-turn and drove away. He claimed this was the last time he saw Lulu alive, and that he had later spoken with Jennifer, who allegedly admitted to killing Lulu. However, investigators found Graham's story unconvincing, and after investigating his claims, they arrested him for making a false statement. The false statement charge against Graham was eventually dropped, or he was exonerated, which wasn't entirely surprising, given the difficulty of proving such charges. However, this didn't mean Graham was cleared of suspicion in Lulu's murder. Detective Jacobson acknowledged that portions of Graham's story might have been true, particularly his claim of talking with Lulu at the bar, or even leaving with her. His accurate description of her clothing that night suggested he had indeed seen her, but his account of subsequent events remained questionable. Nothing definitively connected Graham to Lulu's death beyond his admission of seeing her, so investigators could only monitor his activities while continuing their investigation. Months later, they were reminded of just how dangerous Graham truly was when he was charged in January 1984 with beating and stabbing a woman in his apartment. He was convicted of first-degree assault and sentenced to 15 years, demonstrating his continued propensity for violence against women. More than a year passed before investigators received their next significant break in the case. In December 1985, a woman named Shirley was at the police station reporting a sexual assault when she made an unexpected request that would prove crucial to the investigation. While preparing to leave the station, she asked to look at photographs of black males because she wanted to see the person who had killed Lulu. When asked if she meant Lulu Caesar, she confirmed she did and identified the killer as a man she used to date named Robert Graham. Shirley's account provided the most detailed description of Lulu's final hours that investigators had received. She claimed to have been friends with Lulu and described being in Graham's car during the summer of 1983 when they stopped at a red light on Sigourney Street near Albany Avenue. Shirley said she spotted Lulu walking up the street around 2:00 a.m. and invited her to party with them. Lulu agreed and got into the back seat of the car, and Shirley could accurately describe what Lulu was wearing that night. According to Shirley, the three of them went to Robert's sister's house where he was staying and partied until sunrise. When Lulu decided she wanted to go home, Robert offered to drive her, while Shirley remained at the house. Shirley waited for approximately 1 hour before Robert returned, appearing shaky with bloodshot eyes and trying to act calm. She said Robert arrived back between 6:00 and 6:30 a.m., and when she later asked what was wrong, he confessed to killing Lulu. Shirley's account of Robert's confession was particularly damning. She said Robert had planned to pay Lulu for sex, but Lulu had allegedly taken his money and fled the car. Graham then chased her down, caught her, raped her, and stabbed her to death. However, what stunned detectives most was a detail Shirley provided that had been kept completely confidential by law enforcement. On July 18, 5 days after Lulu's body was discovered, detectives had returned to the crime scene after receiving information about styrofoam cups that might be evidence. While searching the area, they found the cups in a coffee stirrer, but more importantly, they discovered the tip of a knife in a pool of blood, most likely from the murder weapon. This crucial piece of evidence had been kept secret from the public and media. When Shirley told investigators that Graham had mentioned the knife tip breaking off during the stabbing, it provided powerful corroboration for her account. She shouldn't have known this detail unless she had received information directly from Lulu's killer. However, some aspects of Shirley's story didn't align with other evidence. She claimed they had picked up Lulu around 2:00 a.m., but another witness had placed Lulu on Vine Street between 2:30 and 3:00 a.m. Additionally, the autopsy had revealed no drugs or alcohol in Lulu's system, contradicting claims of partying that night. Detective Jacobson theorized that Lulu might have simply hung out without partaking in any substances during the alleged party. More significantly, Shirley eventually changed her story, providing a second version in which she claimed to have accompanied Robert when he drove Lulu home. This transformed her account from secondhand information to first-hand witness testimony, a crucial distinction for the investigation. In her revised account, Shirley said they ended up parking in Keeney Park, where Robert wanted to have sex with both women. Shirley claimed she wasn't interested, but Lulu agreed to participate for money. When Lulu allegedly took the payment and tried to flee the car, Robert chased her down and used a steak knife he had concealed in his sock to kill her. With Shirley now claiming to be an eyewitness to the murder, investigators felt they had sufficient evidence to pursue charges against Graham. In April 1986, while Robert Graham was still serving time for the 1984 assault conviction, he was arrested for Lulu's murder. However, the arrest was short-lived as prosecutors determined that even with Shirley's testimony, they lacked sufficient evidence for a successful prosecution. A case relying on a single witness, particularly one whose story had changed, represented the most challenging type of case to bring to court, especially without scientific evidence or a confession. Graham's charges were eventually dismissed without prejudice, leaving open the possibility of future prosecution if additional evidence emerged. The dismissal proved particularly bitter for those involved in the investigation and Lulu's family, especially when Graham was arrested again in 1990 for shooting a woman in the face. He was convicted of first-degree assault in January 1993 for that crime and sentenced to 20 years, demonstrating his continued pattern of violence against women. While Graham continued his criminal behavior, Lulu's case remained stagnant. Detective Jacobson noted that no new leads or alternative suspects had emerged since Graham's initial arrest for Lulu's murder. Graham was released in 2005 after completing his 1993 sentence, but his freedom was relatively brief. 10 years later, he was arrested for the 2015 murder of Tashona Jackson, who was last seen getting into her car before her body was found a week later behind a building. Although the medical examiner couldn't determine the exact cause of death, sufficient circumstantial evidence existed to convict Graham of her murder. In 2016, Detective Jacobson took over Lulu's case and decided to utilize advances in forensic science to re-examine evidence from 1983. He requested DNA testing to cross-reference Robert Graham with any genetic material found at the crime scene or on Lulu's body. The tested materials included swabbings from fingernail clippings, waistbands of underpants, and the interior front of undergarments, as well as fingernail scrapings. The test results surprised Detective Jacobson, as every location where a single DNA profile was obtained came back as female. The identity of this female profile remains unclear, though Detective Jacobson believes it likely belongs to Lulu herself. However, because her blood type was never documented during the autopsy, he cannot confirm this assumption definitively. When asked whether the DNA might belong to Shirley, potentially indicating greater involvement than she claimed, Detective Jacobson found this unlikely. Based on the force and pattern of stab wounds, Detective Jacobson maintains no doubt that Lulu was killed by a man, which is why investigators never collected DNA samples from Shirley, as she was never considered a suspect. Regarding mixture profiles that might contain both victim and perpetrator DNA, Graham was not found on any of the evidence tested. However, this doesn't necessarily eliminate him as a suspect, given the age of the evidence and the packaging methods used in the 1980s, which may not have been conducive to preserving DNA structures. Robert Graham died of COVID-19 complications in 2021 while serving his life sentence for Tashana Jackson's murder. Despite his death, Detective Jacobson remains committed to pursuing the case, noting that Graham's treatment of women throughout his criminal career fits the pattern of violence evident in Lulu's murder. Even though Graham has passed away, Detective Jacobson would still like to close the case definitively for Lulu and her family. To finally resolve the case, Detective Jacobson acknowledges he may need public assistance, as the available DNA evidence is not currently eligible for entry into the CODIS database. Whether Robert Graham committed the crime or someone else was responsible, Detective Jacobson recognizes that a case this old requires community support to move forward. He specifically appeals for anyone who knew Lulu Caesar, witnessed events related to her murder, or has any information about the case to contact the Hartford Police Department. Detective Jacobson is particularly interested in speaking with Shirley, the key witness from the 1980s investigation, whom he has never had the opportunity to interview personally. He believes Shirley may be living in South Carolina and could potentially hold the final piece of information needed to resolve the case. Shirley's testimony was crucial to the original investigation, and her current perspective on events from nearly 40 years ago might provide the breakthrough needed to finally bring justice for Lulu. The murder of Lulu Caesar represents more than just an unsolved homicide. It reflects the broader challenges faced by marginalized young women in urban America during the 1980s. Lulu's story highlights how societal vulnerabilities can make certain individuals targets for predators, while also demonstrating the persistence of law enforcement officers who refuse to let such cases fade into obscurity. Detective Jacobson's continued dedication to solving Lulu's murder, even decades after the fact, exemplifies the commitment that cold case investigators bring to seeking justice for forgotten victims. More than 40 years after that terrible morning in Keeney Park, Lulu Caesar's case remains open, waiting for the final piece of evidence or witness testimony that might finally provide closure. Her brutal murder shocked the Hartford community and stands as a reminder that every victim deserves justice, regardless of their circumstances or how much time has passed. Until her killer is definitively identified and held accountable, Lulu's case will continue to challenge investigators and serve as a testament to the importance of never giving up the fight for justice, no matter how long it takes.